the dialectic of friendship and the friendship of dialectic. And when I look at the book and I think that's 35 years of friendship with Professor Begam. I wrote an email to Richard teasing him with some obscure reference to Descartes.
What philosopher died in the winter in Stockholm in, I believe it was 1751? And I wrote back, that's easy, Descartes.
And then this took off a bit. I had no idea, I wasn't at the time that this was going to become a serious dialogue, but for about 2 or 3 pages, I just let him go on, that I would go on, and went back and forth. And after about 3 or 4 weeks, I started thinking, we should do something with this. And then I finally told him, by the way, I'm saving your replies. You will not get to alter them a whit. That's it, you're on the hook. And so from that Cartesian germ, this collaboration took off, and we produced then 9 dialogues after the Descartes dialogue. And no one's done this before. As an act of literary criticism, there are famous letters between famous people, but there's no proper Platonic conversational dialectic dialogue or collaboration that's emerged. So we're looking back to Plato, updating Plato in some ways. This dialogue is called Flaubert's hat trick, or the pleasures of banality. I think it is Julian Barnes in Flaubert's Parrot who describes the French author as the butcher of romanticism and the inventor of realism. I wonder if the latter accolade is fully justified by the well-known passage below that describes in loving, hateful detail the schoolboy cap of Charles Bovary. This is the description of the hat from about 4 or 5 pages into Madame Bovary. It was one of those headgears of composite order in which we can find traces of the bearskin, the shako billycock hat, sealskin cap, and cotton nightcap. One of those poor things, in fine, whose dumb ugliness has depths of expression, like an imbecile's face. Oval, stiffened with whalebone, it began with 3 round knobs. Then came in succession lozenges of velvet and rabbit skin separated by a red band. After that, a sort of bag that ended in a cardboard polygon covered with complicated braiding, from which hung, at the end of a long, thin cord, small, twisted gold threads in the manner of a tassel. The cap was new, its peak shone. I'm imagining the oratorical Flaubert bellowing out those 3 sentences 5 hours into his 12-hour writing day, until the hideous hat of young Bovary begins to become, through the alchemy of style, a triumph of le mot juste. In other words, at once a simulacrum and an anticipation of the grand performance, the miraculous hat trick that transforms bored, petty bourgeois farm girl, a voluptuously sentimental Emma, into Madame Bovary, a work of art. That hat is doubtless an example of both realism and symbolism, but its expressiveness, editorially insisted upon in the passage itself, is part of a new language game, for which the words absolute style, Flaubert's own words in his letters to Louise Collet, are an abbreviation. This game has intrigued me for decades, and it makes one of my favorite novels also one of the funniest novels ever written. I think that in all the fuss made about Flaubert as a realist, one forgets that he is also a humorist of the highest order, as boisterous as Rabelais, as witty as La Rochefoucauld, as darkly comical as Voltaire. What happens if we put on that imbecilic cap as a thinking cap, as Flaubert did for 5 years during the composition of Madame Bovary?
Homer gives us epic ekphrasis with the shield of Achilles. Flaubert gives us bourgeois ekphrasis with the hat of Charles Bovary. And lest we miss the connection, the master of le mot juste drives home his classical illusion by calling the hat une casquette, variation on casque, or helmet. As you point out, the hat trick metamorphoses the base metal of everyday life into the precious gold of art. But it also, in wonderfully perverse and distressing ways, does the opposite. It suggests that Flaubert's precious metal may itself be fool's gold. And this is where the Homeric allusion becomes important. For we must remember that it is Hephaestus who engages in the poiesis, or making, of Achilles' shield. While Homer's poetic model is an Olympian deity, Flaubert's is a provincial hat maker. While Homer is inspired by heaven, sing Athena of the wrath of Achilles, Flaubert's muse is a shopkeeper, sing, O milliner, of the stupidity of Charles. You, of course, know the letter of 16 January 1852 to Louise Collet, in which Flaubert speaks of his desire to write a book, and I now quote, a book about nothing, dependent on nothing external, which would be held together by the internal strength of its style, just as the earth, suspended in the void, depends on nothing external for its support. A book which would have almost no subject, close quote. Charles's grotesque hat, and the empty head it goes on, is a symbol of this vacuity. In a sense, Flaubert's subject is his lack of a subject. In a sense, his art is about its own debasement into meaninglessness and insignificance. John Updike once said that Andy Warhol's painting has, and I quote, the powerful effect of making nothing seem important, close quote. Of course, the nothing here includes Warhol's art. I would argue that this is precisely how Flaubert, living in the post-ideological aftermath of 1848 in France, conceived of his own art. Charles Bovary's hollow headpiece is, in other words, the 19th century equivalent of a can of Campbell's soup, presumably vichyssoise rather than tomato, and Flaubert is painfully aware of the implications this has for his aesthetic project. His hat trick consists in creating a world suspended in the void. But he remains uncertain whether his lapidary expression will be sufficient to supply the emptiness of his occasion. Bereft of deities, will he remain a Homer, or will he become the literary equivalent of a provincial hat maker, artfully gluing together felt and feathers?